What's the best job quitting story you can tell? Story 1. Long story, the only kind I know how to tell, it seems. When I was 18, I was working at a gas station. Overall, I liked the job. I met a lot of cool people. Work wasn't too hard. Most of the coworkers were tolerable. The place was usually busy since we were about half a mile outside of a huge Air Force base. Made the days go quicker. My biggest issue with the place was the manager. She was lazy, incompetent, and only cared about the sales numbers and labor costs, so she'd always have just one person scheduled to a shift. She'd come in, do her paperwork, and go, never bothering to help with stocking or cleaning. The only time she cared about those things is when the district manager came in. Then she'd throw us under the bus, saying we refused to stock or follow her cleaning schedule. It's really hard to clean and stock when you're the only person on shift, and you have a line 5 to 8 people deep for hours. The shift before you can't do their duties because they're stuck behind the register the whole time. So your shift is spent doing what they couldn't do, and the next shift spends their time doing what you couldn't get to. One day, my last day, the manager and DM come in right as the lunch rush is dying down. I'm trying to finish what the previous shift couldn't, so the place looks like hell and everything needs to be stocked. The DM comments on the state of the store and expected the manager starts saying how we're lazy and always take advantage of her, then starts talking shoot about me to the DM, with me standing right there trying to get things caught up. It pissed me off, but I kept my cool and calmly told her it wasn't very professional to talk shoot about employees, especially in front of them, and especially when they aren't being set up to succeed. Her response was, "What do you know about being a manager? If you don't like how I run this place, then you know where the door is." She turned around and started talking more shoot to the DM, so I politely excused myself to get by them, went in the back, took off my smock, and clocked out. As I walked past them one more time, now without my uniform, the manager asked where I thought I was going. All I could do is grin and say, "We do listen to you sometimes. Like you said a moment ago, if I don't like how you run this place, I know where the door is." I then danced my way out of the store, never looking back. Mildly interesting postscript to that story. A few years later, I went back to work for that same company in a different store and made my way up to manager. Unrelated, her carefully crafted illusion of being a good manager eventually came crashing down on her. She was demoted to assistant manager and relocated to another store to be retrained by the manager, who had the highest sales of the region for that quarter. Who was that manager, you might wonder? Me. Yes, she remembered me. No, I wasn't a jerk to her. I retrained her. She became better, got another store, and we actually ended up becoming good friends. Story 2. I posted this on another thread. I worked at a sushi restaurant that had a really high turnaround rate. The reason why is because one of the owners was a huge meanie who loved to yell at people. I saw people come and go. Most usually lasted only a few days. There was a sushi chef there that had been there for a while. He was pretty cool, and we got along great when we worked together. His girlfriend also worked there as a cashier, and a lot of times they were scheduled together. One Saturday that I was supposed to be off, I get a call from Carol, the meanie boss, asking me if I could come in. Apparently Max and his girlfriend had had enough of her, and they both just straight up left and walked out of the restaurant. The place was pretty small, so usually it was just the cooks in the back, the sushi chef, and the cashier delivery driver. So when they left, they basically left the place empty, aside from the cooks, who did not speak English that well. I decided to take the shift for the extra money, and when I got there, Carol was already there behind the sushi prep area making orders. She usually didn't come in at all on weekends, but would still watch the security cameras occasionally from her laptop at home. And if she saw you standing around doing nothing, she would call and yell at you. It turns out that was exactly what she did to Max and his girlfriend, and they had finally had enough. Carol showed me the security footage of Max yelling at her over the phone, hanging up, then taking off his apron, and both him and his girlfriend flipping of the security camera and walking out. She was showing me because she couldn't believe how disrespectful they were and how they could just leave the restaurant like that when there were customers in it. Personally, I thought it was pretty badass they walked out together. I know I wanted to quit hundreds of times when I was there, but I was a broke college student that needed the money. Last I heard of them was that they both got jobs at the sushi place that was competing with the restaurant they walked out on. Answer: one of the times I came closest to punching out early and never coming back was kind of similar. I work retail, and my usual position happens to be right by one of our security cameras. On this particular day, I was working the 8 to 4:30 shift, and we were crazy busy. Usually I'm pretty flexible with my breaks and lunch. It doesn't bother me if I don't get my lunch until an hour or so past halfway through the day, as long as I get my first 15 in sometime before then. So on this day, I think I took my first break a bit past 11 o'clock. A bit later than usual, but I didn't mind. But things only got busier from there. Finally, around 3 o'clock, things quieted down enough that I didn't feel bad leaving my coworker on his own while I took my lunch. So I'm in the break room eating my lunch. I'm like 10 or 15 minutes into my half-hour lunch when I hear my boss yell from his office, "Where's my name?" My coworker yelled back, "On his lunch," for me. When I got back from lunch, I poked my head in the boss's office to see if he needed me for something. He said no. He was just looking at the camera feed and wondering why I wasn't working. Maybe it was partly because I was already stressed out and tired from a busy day, but that really pissed me off. Like, me and my coworker have been busting our jerk on one of the busiest days I've ever seen. I don't get around to taking my lunch until 7 hours into my 8-hour day. Meanwhile, the manager is sitting in his office watching us on the security camera. Like, what the fudge? You can see on the camera how crazy it is. So if you have nothing better to do, why don't you come help? After all, he often comments, on days when he has lots of paperwork to catch up on, how much he dislikes sitting in his office all day. And he knew darn well that I'm by no means a slacker. He's told me himself how much he admires my work ethic. I really wanted to quit then and there, but like many of the times I feel that way, I dislike the thought of leaving my coworkers with the mess my quitting on the spot would have caused. Story 3. Shared this before, but I'm so proud of it. I'm sharing it again. I was working in a grocery store for several years. The last year and a half, it was like they stopped bothering to try and train anyone else to do anything extra because it was just expected that I could handle it. On top of being a cashier, I was expected to cover the store's coffee bar while the morning person went to lunch, took grocery orders over the phone because some people apparently don't like using the store's online order form, getting the grocery orders together, light stock work, training new cashiers. You get the idea. More than once, I either was given my break at the last possible minute, in one case literally an hour before I was scheduled to leave, or because I was at the coffee bar all day because the person scheduled there called out, I was just sent home early since there was no one to relieve me because the managers didn't want to be back there for a whole half hour. No extra pay for all that, just an occasional good job followed by more work. But I was eventually given an opportunity to leave with a safety net. The better half and I were buying a house well away from the store, and he gave me permission to quit whenever I wanted. Finances were good enough to where I could be out of work for a while. I wanted to make it hurt, though. Years of being treated like a slave made me bitter as hell. I gave my 2 weeks notice knowing that my last day would be right before the Mardi Gras weekend, when they would need all hands on deck, especially since the store was near a major parade route. For those not familiar, basically the later half of the week and weekend leading up to Mardi Gras, the parades really start ramping up in frequency. And no, during that time, they did not bother training anyone else to do that extra stuff. The best part is that they were likely blissfully unaware of just how badly they were screwed until the new schedule came out that same day, and they didn't have anyone else to do all that extra stuff that they relied on me for. Edited to add, things there got even worse. And as of last year, according to the former coworker I ran into, there's one person handling most of what I used to. Oh yes, and they've thrown in new technology to make things more complicated. As I understand, the Mardi Gras weekend and the actual day of was a nightmare, seeing as how I was one of the fastest and most reliable workers. Story 4. I had to lay off my entire staff and myself with 8 hours notice. I was the contract project manager on a government project, office type work. At our periodic review on a Thursday, the government announced they would not be renewing our contract, and our last day was Friday, the next day. I brought everyone into the conference room first thing the next day, let everyone know that we were all out of a job and that today was everyone's last day. I had everyone email me their resumes, and we went over everyone's on the conference room projector and updated them over the course of the day. I then printed out reference sheets for everyone, and we all spent the remainder of the day writing letters of recommendation for each other. I ordered everyone pizza and bought everyone a round of drinks at the bar next door. Most folks had jobs by the end of the next week. Answer: this reminds me of my favorite superintendent at my last job. We were downsizing and cut down 2 crews unexpectedly. The call had come from the highest up. We had not expected this and had just told them they were safe. The superintendent lays them off and tells them they all have balls and to walk into another company's office on Monday. He then put in his 2 weeks citing that upper management had overstepped by lying to us. Story 5. Worked at a place for a year and a half that was similar to Subway, but little more healthier in the sense of also having salads, wraps, smoothies, etc. The owners also had a sister store that I would sometimes fill in at if needed, and I found out that their new hires were making an hour more than I was. So I went to the owners for a measly one raise and was told no, and some bullshit story about things being tight right now and maybe soon blah blah blah. Which was bullshit because the owners already took their third vacation for the year. Asked for a few days off, started another job, and when I came back, I gave them a 1 week notice. They were so pissed. But here's the good part of the story. A few months before I left, they hired a new manager, and I'd help him with counting out the register and doing cash drops to the bank after we closed. Well, after I left and he was the only one handling all that, he started pocketing the cash to supplement his gambling habit and ended taking over $4,000 before they caught on to what he was doing. The owners also had to settle up with the food distributors since he skipped out on paying them and they eventually quit delivering, so there went some more money out the door. Since they were too cheap to do a background test when they hired this manager, they found out that he had an extensive record and even did time in prison for arson. There was also no way of them recovering that money because their lawyer said it would cost them more to go after it. And that's the story of how refusing a goddamn measly dollar an hour raise cost a restaurant thousands. Story 6. Worked in an office supply store's print and marketing department. Should have known the place was not good when the management tells me on day one that the last person who they hired for that position quit unexpectedly after a week. Very little, inadequate training, obscene workload. Our legally required breaks were often discouraged or outright denied. Lots of unnecessary stress pressure, and management was very rude and inept. I know all the hallmarks of a shoot workplace. After about 2 whole months of this harmful behavior, I finally resolved to quit. I write out a letter of resignation and a 2 weeks notice, which I plan to give to management after my shift ends. Flash forward to midway through my shift. I'm desperately trying to clear an immense backlog of orders, all while handling the entire department and the numerous current angry customers on my own, which was standard practice. There's a lengthy line at the counter, and several people are needing my help at the self-serve printers too. It's at this time my chief manager decides to come to me and ask me to print off next week's schedule of feat she can easily accomplish herself in her own office without me. I point out the obvious fact that I'm currently swamped, but I can do it for her if when things have slowed down. She huffs impatiently in response and insists I do it right then, regardless of the other people I am currently helping. Something in me just snaps in the face of her childishness. I'm afraid I can't print the schedule off anyways, Mom, as it will likely be incorrect. You'll no longer be working here after today. The manager's eyes went wide. I'm gonna need that in writing. She inhales. That's when I handed her the resignation letter she had tucked away in my apron pocket, sans the 2 week notice, of course, which she proceeds to slam down on the counter in front of me. Let me tell you, the woman was seething. Are you at least gonna stay here till close? I calmly responded that I intended to, and did. That was the first and only day management made sure I got my legally required break. And the first time I ever heard them mention that they planned on hiring more people for that grossly understaffed department. Needless to say, I walked out of that place that night and never came back. TLDR. Worked at a terrible place that was so bad I decided to quit on the spot instead of giving them 2 weeks notice like I had originally intended. Sometimes being the bigger person just isn't worth it. The workload in the print department was so overwhelming that a simple managerial request to print a schedule became the final straw. The narrator decided not to wait out a 2 week notice period and left that very day, though they did finish their duties until closing time. Story 7. I work at a small local engineering firm owned by a husband and wife. They're fantastic bosses. A couple years ago, we had another husband and wife couple get hired to be drafters. They were pretty lazy employees. Spent half their day watching YouTube, that kind of stuff. After about 6 months, the bosses go on vacation. The next day, the drafter couple come in and say today's their last day. They're moving about 8 hours away, totally out of the blue. We were all like, okay, did you talk to the bosses? Did you give any notice? Oh yeah, we talked to them yesterday and gave 2 weeks notice, but they said to feel free and go ahead and move so we can get our kids settled in a new school before the new year starts. All right, well, good luck. They worked maybe 3 hours, but put a full day on their time card. Then they sent out a company-wide email thanking everyone for being so nice to them while they were here, blah, blah, blah. It was touching. The next day, the bosses call and were like, "What happened with so-and-so?" They had no clue. The email was the first they heard of it. X200B. The situation with the drafting couple demonstrates how a lack of communication can lead to unexpected endings. They resigned while the owners were on vacation, leaving behind only a farewell email that, as it turned out later, did not align with the actual facts. Story 8. Worked for an inventory company famous for being in trouble for labor issues. Shouldn't have shocked me. Ended up getting scheduled to work an afternoon, an overnight, and then immediately followed by driving a 13-passenger van 40 miles upstate. I was also scheduled to work that night, driving back to get the people I'd bussed up there. About 4 hours of actual sleep availability over 48 hours, on top of life responsibilities and a second job. I was told if I called out, I could tender my resignation. Waited until 3 hours before my shift to call my manager in the middle of the night to tell her I was doing just that. Turned in my laptop and felt happier than ever before. Story 9. I was working in banking and dealing with people's mortgages. I had one of the absolute worst bosses I've ever had. I had to report her to HR about making racist comments to me. I was supposed to have a meeting with HR and they didn't even bother to show up. So I figured nobody is taking me seriously here, so fudge them. I took all the files from my desk, about 50 defaulted mortgages, threw them all in a secured garbage bin, threw my keys on the desk, told me boss to fudge off, and I quit. As I'm driving home, they called to ask me one. If I really quit in two, where are the files that were on my desk? My friend said those were the only signed files they had on those homes since the bank wasn't all electronic yet. So all those homes that people were about to lose had to be given back because the bank didn't have any records on them. Story 10. I once put in notice for my summer fast food job because it was interfering too much with my classwork. Once fall came around, the manager then stops everything and makes a huge production of announcing to everyone on shift that I was leaving to go back to school. I was in 10th grade. He made it sound like I was about to get my PhD in curing cancer. Shoot was awkward. Answer. When I worked in fast food, my manager was always really proud of her workers going further in their education. Really anyone who worked hard. I know it frustrated her that some of her best employees were ones working to pay for college because they always moved on after they graduated, but she always worked with us on scheduling around classes, exams, and internships. I miss working for her sometimes. She also was never dramatic about who was or wasn't going to college, so it didn't feel overdone or like she was trying to shame anyone. As far as I know, she's now a district manager for several stores. Story 11. My friend's story. She was getting laid off by a firm whose business dried up. She was hired by another firm and quickly realized the CEO, while good at the stuff the company did, and a good salesman, had no idea how to manage people. Plus, he was really cheap. He was constantly changing his mind, making outrageous demands. Once she got called away from her birthday party on a Saturday night because he had an idea and wanted all hands on deck to make it happen now, and underpaid everyone. So her year-end review comes. And bonsuets were supposed to be a big factor in compensation. She has had positive reviews by her direct bosses for most of the year. And the CEO tells her she isn't good enough to get a bonus. She's livid but needs the job, so she bites her tongue. Then she goes and job hunts like a mofo. Winds up getting a better job offer, well, better salary. Theoretically, the bonus would make this job better. So she goes to his office about 2 weeks later and asks him to reconsider, etc. Points out when she was hired, this was sold as a major part of her compensation. No dice, he says. It's not a given and he just doesn't think she's good enough. She says she has a job offer. So you need to match this or I'm quitting. He then said, fine, but I'm not paying out your vacation and you need to work the next 2 weeks. He didn't know her supervisor had already approved a 2-week vacation for her and was absolutely livid. Story 12. While I was a conscript, I had 2 of the world's greatest idiots in command of my unit. Both had been stuck in their current rank for years, and neither gave a fudge about how the unit was run. At the whim of either of them, we could be expected to wash and scrub all the cars and garages, transport unit of around 50 vehicles, up to 4 times a day, and be deliberately held from leaving until the last bus has left the base. It's a 2-kilometer trek from the company line back to civilization. One day, about 2 weeks before I was scheduled to leave, they decided to fudge with medical records. I had a doctor's appointment previously approved by the Army's doctors one day, and for reasons only known to himself, one of the commanders decided this would be a good day to lock everyone up in camp and delete my appointment record from the company system. I checked with the other commander, technically his superior by one rank, who basically told me to go fudge myself and stay in camp. On the final day of my service, I brought all my medical documents, including my appointment records with the Army doctor's approval, to the battalion CO, who was about to release me to civilian life. To my understanding, they both got slapped with a pretty severe fine and are no longer eligible for further promotions. Story 13. Old boss got canned and new boss came in. New boss was a shoot manager, an all-around shoot person who constantly treated the team like dirt. On top of that, the company had lied to me about my compensation, and I was making less money several years into the job than I was when I started. I don't want to sound like I'm talking myself up, but I always did my best to cultivate friendships with those around me and treat people well. On my last day, my boss didn't even say goodbye or thank me for anything, despite the fact that I was bringing in more money than anyone else on my team. I was feeling down when a woman in another department suggested I go out for drinks with a few people, and I agreed. Come to find out, about 30 people I had worked with, my entire department of 5 and 20, some others from different departments, rented out this patio area at a nice bar for a going-away party. They were all crushed. I was leaving, and everyone talked shoot about the new boss, saying he was an idiot. Come to find out, after my departure, a group of veterans left, and the company had to go through 2 rounds of layoffs in 6 months due to massively reduced profits. The quitting story isn't anything crazy, but seeing everyone I had affected stand up for me after dealing with such a shoot boss felt great. Story 14. Didn't happen to me, but I got to watch this happen. I went into a Taco John's and ordered a super burrito with no tomatoes or black olives to go. They weren't super busy, but there were a couple of orders ahead of mine. So I'm standing near the counter watching them put items together, and I see that they have started on my burrito. The cook loads it up with everything and wraps it up. He has it in his right hand and reaches up with his left to clear out the order on the monitor. He stops for a moment when he realizes that he fudged up by putting everything on the burrito. He is facing me, and he turns around and fires a 100 miles per hour fastball burrito against the back wall. He walks into the back room, takes off his Taco John shirt, puts on a t-shirt, grabs his smokes and his drink, and heads out the back door. 30 seconds later, the girl running the drive-thru wants to know where Brian is. I pointed him out to her, as by now he is walking across the parking lot toward downtown. I told her that I think Brian gave his notice. She says a few choice words and wants to know what I ordered. Way to give it the man, Brian. Story 15. Working at Walmart, after a couple years of being a mindless goon, I save up my 2-week vacation and put in for it. Told them I was seeing family. The last day of work before my 2-week vacation, I put in my 2-week notice. Took the manager a minute to do the math. So, you're not coming back? No, I'm not. Take care. Story 16. My ex-manager had been with the company for 10 years. During his last 2 to 3 years there, he did nothing. He'd show up to work at 10 and leave around 7 to 8 so that he could get free meals with his team. Even with his lackluster performance, he was promoted from senior manager to director because his teams did well. Few months later, he was demoted back to senior manager, which was the company's way of telling him they were on their way to fire him unless he quits first. Few weeks go by, and what do you know? He was let go. As he had been with the company for 10 years and had a really good salary, he received a severance of $100,000 gross, $70,000 net. Sucks to be let go, but things worked in his favor. He had lined up a new C-suite level job and waited around to get fired because if he had resigned, he would have gotten zero. I believe he started at his new job somewhat immediately, so he didn't have to go long without being paid, considering he recently had his son. So not only did he one-up his old company by getting a better job immediately, but he also got a nice fat severance. Story 17. My first proper job. The place was a hellhole. You could have had the work done by God himself and it wouldn't have been good enough, and I knew I wanted out. I stayed for 8 months and handed in my notice to my manager. 2 weeks later, on my last day, my manager's manager called me into the office while my manager was off and started berating me because I'd, and this is no joke or exaggeration, these were his actual complaint, stapled an invoice with the staples at 45 degrees, not parallel to the long edge of the paper, highlighted the company address on a different invoice with a non-blue highlighter. We'd run out of them because he'd cheaped out on the stationery order. And without using a ruler, and my hole punches on that second invoice were a 1/4 inch too far up the paper. These guys were really OCD. A crooked hole punch was practically a whipping offense. He then goes, I don't think this is going to work out between us, so I've decided to let you go. I just sat there and said, okay, you do know this is my last day anyway. He stops and just stares and goes, what? Apparently my manager never told him that I handed my notice in, so he didn't know I was quitting. He then decided it was easier to put me on gardening leave for the rest of my notice period, all 3 hours of it, than to deal with the paperwork to fire me. They'd never given contracts of employment or anything, and they'd been so harmful behavior and overworked us to such a degree that at one point he was standing in a road convincing me not to throw myself in front of a bus while my mother tried to get there. Because if they'd fired me, I'd have probably taken them to court for breach of regulatory standards, paying less than the minimum wage and wrongful dismissal. In 8 months, they'd never found anything more wrong with my work than things like a wrongly colored highlight or a comma instead of a full stop in a description. I had no written or verbal warnings or anything. Story 18. I was just out of college and had got a real job. So when I had to quit the job I had been at for like a month, I wrote them an email and told them I was leaving to join Scientology in LA and to send my check to my mom at XXX address. I knew I would never go back there or use them as a reference, so I told them some off-the-wall story. It was stupid, but I still laugh about it. Story 19. Last job I quit, I put in my 2 weeks notice and then I came in every day and stayed a few hours late to help with the transition. On my last day, I shook some hands, told everyone it was great working with them, handed in my kit, and left. Story 20. Worked at a gite for over 8 years. Was promised a promotion if I stayed when I was about ready to look for something else. Was called into the office down the road a bit to be informed they were bringing in an ex-employee who had quit a year or two before for the job I was promised. I had heard a rumor of this and had already made my decision. The boss looked shocked when I said I quit. I punched out and left. Simple but sweet. Answer: I'm basically going through this now. Except in my case, I just hit my vested mark, and they brought back a guy who quit for a little over a month, who is now my supervisor. So let me get this straight. I busted my jerk, did everything they asked of me, and then some because it would look good come promotion time, and nothing comes of it. Yet my coworker, who was already above me, quits for a better job, asks for his job back because his new job sucks, and in turn he gets his position back, a raise, an eventual bump to supervisor. X200B, I haven't gotten a raise in 3 years, not including COLA, and HR is pushing me to take what is pretty much a lateral promotion instead. Basically significantly more work with a tiny jerk bump in pay. Story 21. My dad went into the boss office during lunch and said, I have been contacted by the mothership. I have to return to my home planet. Thank you for the job. Shook the guy's hand, left the building, and never contacted them again. Story 22. I may have told this story on here before. In high school, myself and a bunch of friends worked at a newly opened steak and shake restaurant in town. At first it was fun. We could work and goof off a few days a week after school. As the months went by, most of my friends quit, and I was the last person of my group left working there. As my friends quit, the management didn't bother hiring replacements. On the nights that I was scheduled, I was working a 3-person station all by myself. A few weeks of this went by, and it was incredibly stressful. Trying to keep up with orders from the dining room and drive through with no help was daunting. On top of that, I'd have waitresses coming back and screaming at me, the drive-through guy screaming at me, and eventually the managers coming back to yell at me. After one particular rough evening, my shift finally ends and I head to clock out. Literally as I'm heading for the door, the manager on duty, a particular Omega-class jerk, runs in front of me, blocks the exit, and says that I can't leave because they don't have someone coming in to cover the overnight shift. It was a 24-hour restaurant. I explained to him that I'm a high school student and cannot work past 9 p.m. I also have homework and studying that I need to do. After a few minutes of arguing, he won't budge. Rather than continue this charade, I pretend to clock back in, then walk to the back and proceed to climb out the drive-through window. As I'm walking around the parking lot, the manager sees me out the window and throws his hands up like, WTF are you doing? I respond by firing back with both middle fingers and a lewd gesture. It felt so satisfying. Story 23. My second job out of high school was at a video game rental store similar to, but not, Blockbuster. Every now and then we'd have sales to clear out the old VDS and games that weren't getting rented anymore. We had one that was going to occur during the Labor Day weekend in which corporate stated all employees in the highest selling store would get a bonus. That weekend went by, we did our sales, and we waited for the results to see where we ranked. In less than a week, a letter was sent to the store informing us that we had won and that our next paycheck would include the bonus. Next paycheck came, and none of us had bonuses. Store manager SM contacted corporate to find out what gives. Corporate advised that the funds were sent to the district manager, DM, in order to payroll it to us. SM contacts DM, who advised that she didn't feel like we deserved it, and so she decided to give it to the newly opening store in the next county over as encouragement for the newly hired staff. DM refused to rectify the situation. SM called corporate back to file a complaint about it. A day or so later, SM calls a store meeting in the middle of the day asking everyone to come in as she had some very important information to tell us. Everyone was able to make it because we all expected it had something to do with the missing bonuses. After everyone arrives, SM explains that corporate is refusing to honor paying us the bonuses because the money was given to the DM to disperse. Once she got it, she was allowed to give it to any store she wanted in the winning district. SM explained that after escalating it further, she found out that our DM was the company owner's sister-in-law, and he didn't want to start shoot with her and make his wife mad. So, essentially, we were all screwed out of a bonus that we were told we won. At that point, the SM said, "I don't know about all of you, but I'm done with this place." All the rest of us agreed. As many of us furnished the employee break room, everyone began grabbing their own stuff and taking it to our respective vehicles out front. I brought the table, another brought the microwave, etc. There was nothing in the employee break room that actually belonged to the company. So during all this, we had the store open and customers were coming in and out. Some actually stood around and listened to the entire meeting. We didn't care. As we were moving the things out to our cars, a police officer, who was a regular at the store, stopped by because he thought it was odd for people to be moving furniture and appliances out of the store at 2:30 in the afternoon. One of the customers who listened in on the meeting explained to him what had happened as we continued to pack up our stuff. He volunteered to stand by as we vacated our property from the building in case there were any problems, like someone from corporate showing up while we were doing this. We all signed letters of resignation. A few of the customers even wrote their own letters to share their disgust with the company and what they did to us. As a key holder, I dropped my store key in an envelope with my resignation. The SM advised everyone to make their final selections as we were preparing to lock the doors. The few remaining customers finished up their letters or got whatever rentals. The decision by the entire team to quit at once was a direct response to the unfair distribution of earned bonuses. Since almost all the break room furniture belonged to the employees themselves, they took it with them, leaving the room empty in front of customers and the responding police officer. Story 24. I loved my job but disliked the way the ops manager and manager treated me. I worked there for 2 years and was one of their best workers. One morning I got into an argument with the manager and it got so heated that when I was walking away, something just went off in my brain. I turned around, the manager was talking to all of his supervisors at the time and yelled 2 weeks and I'm out. Best feeling ever. The look in all their faces were priceless. Basically, I disliked going in at 9 and they would bring everyone in at 5 but me. So for the next 2 weeks, I came in at 9 and left after 4 hours with everyone that came in at 5. When they asked me why I was clocking out, I told them I wasn't feeling good, and gave them that. I'm lying and don't care if you know smile. Man, that was great. Story 25. Dallas office, well-established company with the new CEO. CEO writes an all-company email with some sort of harmless inspirational messaging about how we are going to crush it and do well, blah, blah, blah. Nothing to get worked up about. A woman in accounting who was mild-mannered and an intense Christian Texas lady does a reply all that says something like we believe a word that pompous fudge has to say. She had been with the company for 15 years and came in super early to do the books. So by the time most people got to work, it had already happened. But people there at the time said that her reply all went out. She made a loud for her squeak when she realized her mistake, calmly got an empty box from the mailroom, packed up her desk, walked out to her car without saying a word to anyone, and drove away. She was never seen again. Edit. Spelling. Story 26. Nameless photography studio that's been in and out of business in certain cheap stores. They were shady as heck. Like not ordering customers' images so they could get them to come in for another session to try to get them to buy other stuff. My regional manager was a meanie and would make fun of employees behind their backs. One girl she called horse mule donkey because she had large teeth. One girl they nicknamed adult worker Beth because her outfits were more revealing than she liked, etc. I'm sure I had a name, but she was terrible and I dislike her. The company also sucked and would clock us out automatically, even if we were still working. There was no overtime, even though you were expected to work it. And if you did over 40 hours, they'd split it, so you'd only get 40 one week and then 40 the next. So one day, a Thursday, I have a lady come in looking for invitations she had ordered for her kid's birthday party. They are nowhere. I call the store manager who says, "Oh, I didn't like her, so I didn't order them." Now, I've had enough of this place and had a job lined up that was going to start in 2 weeks. So I tell the lady what the SM said and gave her a corporate's number. She called them in front of me and they basically played dumb. While she's on hold, they call me and begin to cuss me out about how I told the customer this, that, everything. They said that I'd be docked pay for this. I laughed, said, "Fudge it, this isn't worth it," told the girl on the phone that I was quitting, gave the lady some free gift cards for her troubles, shut the store down and left. Regional manager gave my cell phone out to all employees to have them prank me. She also tried calling me several times, left some threatening voicemails about how she would ruin me and my career. Still waiting on that. Ended up going to see a friend that weekend, and it was like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. I slept for 12 hours that Saturday. Dear, thank you, kind stranger, for my first ever Reddit silver. Although this was a shit show of a job with a raging cunt for a boss, it gave me the energy and drive to find the best job I ever had with coworkers and bosses that I truly loved. I'm still friends with 90 with them, and it's been 10 years since the job contract finished. Story 27. Back when I worked in Austin, I was a bouncer at a 2-level live music venue. I got a promotion to bartend in the second floor of the club on certain nights. Bouncing, I made 12 an hour, and usually 40 in tips per shift from the bartenders for helping clean, stock, and throwing out shitheads. Bartending, I made 2.13 an hour, with the hope of pulling in a few $100s a night from tips. The only problem is the upstairs bar never had customers. There were often nights where I had literally 0 customers, so it was actually costing me money and fuel to come to work. On one of these 0 customer nights, it was around midnight, so I had been working for 6 hours basically for free. I decided, fudge this, I'm closing up early, which was allowed when there were no patrons. As I'm walking to my car, the owner comes up to me, stumbling tipsy. He asked me how everything is going, and I told him I was bummed because I wasn't making any money. He proceeds to berate me, telling me he doesn't give a fudge about me or any of the other employees and how I need to suck it up. I told him I didn't want to discuss this any further since he had been drinking, got in my car, and left. The next day, I drove to San Antonio to go see Tool with my friends, and while I was at the show, my general manager called. After the concert, I called him back, and he told me he had just had a meeting with the owner, and the owner told him he was tired of me getting tipsy and telling him how to run his business. I told the manager what had actually happened, but that it didn't really matter, and I was sorry to not be working with him anymore. No frozen Moses, you aren't fired. The owner just wanted me to reprimand you. Nah, fudge that. I'm not working for a piece of shoot that tells me he doesn't care but me and then lies about the situation. So I quit over the phone. The next week, I got hired to bounce at their direct competitor, which was 2 blocks away. After about a month there, the owner of the other bar comes walking up. As soon as he sees me, he freezes dead in his tracks. I laughed and said, "Don't worry, I'm not going to hit you." He just nodded and kept walking down the street. I worked at that same bar for 3 more years, and that was the last time he came by. Story 28. Was seconded to a company that my boss had partnered with. Technically, the second company provided my salary while technically still an employee of my boss. Unfortunately, the company that paid me was headed by someone I couldn't stand. After several months under this arrangement, I was ready to quit, but was apprehensive of the consequence if I abruptly resigned. I hadn't indicated to anyone in any way that I was considering leaving, but somehow the company got wind of my dissatisfaction, and one payday suddenly didn't issue me a paycheck. When I questioned the absence of funds in my account that day, I was told that it was company policy to withhold the salary of a resigning employee. I expressed surprise that they had acted in anticipation of something I had not even expressed to management. Arguing thus, I was able to convince the company to issue me a paycheck an hour later. 2 hours later, after withdrawing the funds, I sent the company my notice, confirming what they prematurely accused me of planning to do. Story 29. I was a janitor at an elementary school, I worked there for several years and was popular with that K first grade teachers. I had to move to a different shift so I could work another job. So I swapped with another janitor that the second grade hallway teachers liked. It made them mad, I suppose, and they would file complaints on my work, and I often got called into the office. I was doing my job, but they wanted their other guy back. They were even being rude to me to my face. After several months of this, I get called to the office. My supervisor says, "One more incident and I'm going to write you up." I was calm and said, "That's okay. I'd like to put my 2 weeks in." He looked shocked and said, don't you need some time to think about this?" I said, "I have. Their opinion of me isn't going to change, and I rather save us some time while not that epic." The look of "Dawuth" on his face was priceless. It was nice being able to quit like a calm, reasonable person. In conclusion, I went back to school and got a much better job I enjoy. Answer: the calm resignation is the best play. My story isn't good enough for this post, but I had a shoot boss pull me back to his office to tell me he wanted to demote me. I was a district manager for an oil change place, had 4 units, 3 successful and one that just got a new manager after the old one finally got himself terminated. The city had to shut down a road that 2 of my stores were on due to an underground erosion that was collapsing part of the road. So they wanted to demote me and let the other districts take my remaining stores since I was the newest. I had only been on board for 6 months, and they had been on for years and didn't want to lose any money by giving up a store. I don't blame them. My boss thought to eliminate 2 birds with 1 stone and ate his breakfast burrito while telling me I would hand over my work phone and could report to a store in a different part of town the next morning. I just sat everything work-related on his desk and said, "Nah, I'll just quit. Thanks, though." Went out and told his receptionist she was amazing and hoped she fares well. I knew I was getting terminated or something when I sat next to her desk for 10 minutes before he arrived, and she nervously kept looking over at me. She did his job more than he did, and I wished her well and went out. Called everyone else in my phone on the ride home, asking for references to jobs. 1 week before my son was born. Worst day of my life, but I stayed calm and started making moves. Doing much better now, thanks to that day. So it all worked out. When the construction site ran out of necessary parts and the foreman ignored requests for more, the workers simply stopped performing their tasks. As a final gesture, they left a message on the table and blocked the job shack with ladders before heading off to school for good. Story 30. I worked for Best Buy back in the early 2000s, before Geek Squad, as one of their computer techs while in college. The job itself wasn't horrible, but it was boring as hell because anything past a simple upgrade was sent out to some depot, so I wasn't very invested in the job. On top of that, they never got around to ordering my work shirts, so I just walked around in a black polo I already owned instead of a black Best Buy polo. You'd think that was a hint that they didn't give a shoot about their employees, but then came all the issues with scheduling. I had a very rigid and predictable school schedule, 8 a.m. to 3:30 p.m. every day. I told my boss when he hired me about it, and he said it wasn't an issue. However, they kept scheduling me for noon to 8 p.m. or some weird shoot that conflicted with my schedule at college. After the first few times of, "Where the hell have you been?" it kind of became a running joke, and I realized maybe a better job was a good idea. Cue the biggest shopping day of the year, Black Friday. Store was set to open at some ungodly early hour like 3 a.m., so they wanted everyone at the store at 2 a.m. to get ready. I dragged my jerk in, and an hour later, all hell breaks loose. Customers being assholes, coworkers being grumpy, and the store manager being a male body part to everyone. It sucked. I was tired, and we quickly figured out that there was no intent on giving any breaks, even though we were scheduled enough hours to legally require one. About 5 a.m. rolls around, and coworkers are getting pissed at management for no breaks and started treating customers like crap. Manager comes over and starts yelling, so I take off my name tag, throw it on the counter, and tell him I quit right in front of the computer department staff and customers, and grab my coat and start walking out. He yells after me, "You have to turn in your shirt right now." To which I turn around and yell back, "I've been here 3 months and you never got me a shirt." Petty, but darn, that felt good. Edit. Someone gave gold for this and said, "Sorry we are late, here's your shirt." LOL, I love Reddit. Thanks, stranger. Answer. I was also a pre-Geek Squad Best Buy tech, late 90s, and we didn't send anything to Depot, but otherwise sounds the same. But I also had the boss from hell. He'd make us squeeze customers for every last cent as if it were going directly in his pocket. He dropped a TV on my finger and it cut a pea-sized chunk out of it. Asked to go to first aid and was told I couldn't. So I just bled on everything. The workbench, computers, merchandise. It looked like a body exploded in there after about 30 minutes. I've got a million stories from that place, but my quitting story was a boring one. Story 31. So I was managing an IT group in a Fortune 50 company. At this time, I was trying to figure out how to keep my retirement benefits and retire way early. I have a nice sailboat and took rather long vacations with unpaid time too. One of my guys and his wife came over for an evening and asked a ton of sailing questions. Later, I was gone sailing for nearly 3 months. When I returned, there was the usual lineup of folks needing to talk. The first guy in line was the one who had taken an interest in sailing. They had gone to the Caribbean and took sailing lessons. He gave me his notice with a huge smile. They went back to the Caribbean and bought a boat. He managed to beat me out of the door by a couple years. We are both still cruising. Story 32. I told my manager, who was a chronic liar, that she was an absolute horrible human being and that I quit. She had forced out 2 employees that had serious medical issues, which were making them be a not perfect employee, and somehow was getting away with it. It was a bank I worked at, and I had compiled the data of all the customers she drove away, and the bank had lost about $57 million at this point because of this woman. She flipped out and was yelling loud enough that the people upstairs came downstairs to see how it was. And she kept yelling that I threw a coffee mug at her. She ended up calling the police, but by the time they got there, I already had grabbed my chute out of my desk and left, X200B. As I was saying, this was a bank, so the police, when they were called and told to come to the bank, they assumed it was a robbery and pulled up in full force. Thankfully, the response time was around 4 minutes, and I didn't have much in my desk to grab in a rage. I ended up going to the bar, getting pissed tipsy, eating way too much food, and then having to have a meeting with the CEO CFO, who wanted to know what happened. They ended up telling me what she had said to them and how I was highly disrespectful and threw a coffee mug, and she was pressing charges for assault and battery, that the police wanted to question me. We ended up pulling the security tapes and watching them together after I told them exactly what happened, which was the truth. A cop showed up, they showed him the tapes, they called the woman, they showed her the tape and asked why she would lie about it. And she basically said, "I don't care what the cameras saw, I know what I saw, X200B. At this point of my life, I didn't even drink coffee. I was purely a Dr. Pepper to the veins kind of guy. She didn't get fired though, they told me not to quit, and the next day they moved her to a different branch and gave me a raise. I worked it for a month while looking for another job and quit without giving my 2 weeks. They called me for an exit interview and I told them they know exactly why I left. Story 33. Cafe manager hired a shift leader from outside the company, which was full of young people like me who needed more hours and pay. The new shift leader needed to be full trained, likely lied on her job application, but was still accepted. She was fired second week after 3 no-call, no-shows. And when I asked my manager why he would hire someone with no experience over me or my coworkers, he said he would have to see me work in my current position for another year. This is a job where they cap you under 28 hours. I told him I didn't know what to say and that he can expect my 2-week notice. I just heard from my friend that the manager is quitting and they have hiring ads posted legit everywhere at the moment. Answer: agreeing with another commenter, maybe consider applying again and quoting your service and eligibility for that position. I had to quit my first job because management issues as well, including some employee issues. I work at another store 10 minutes away by the same company where I'm 2 positions higher than I was when I started. They never offered or allowed me to move up in my first job, so I took every opportunity at the store down the road. Story 34. This is a repost. I had a position that was a year's contract. The year was coming up, and I decided that I did not want to continue past the end date. So I told my boss, a complete moron, that I wasn't going to renew my contract. This was 6 weeks before the contract ended. Starting from that day, I was person non grata in the office. I wasn't CC'd on any emails, not invited to any staff meeting. They had a team building event outside the office one day. I showed up for work and no one was there in my department. They were all out team building. I spent the whole day just reading a book, surfing the WW, etc. On my final day, it was about 1 p.m. and I was saying goodbye to people in other departments. The boss comes down and says, "We need you in the office now." I used the phone to call someone, and they said that they had planned a goodbye party for me. After 6 weeks of being treated like shoot, They wanted to make themselves feel good by giving me a cake. I said no way, and snuck up to my desk already cleaned out and walked out the front door, got in my car, and drove home. Turns out, they started paging me for about 30 minutes, then realized that I was gone and the boss got pissed. She decided not to send out my record of employment so I can collect unemployment insurance. I sent an email to her boss's boss, and the CEO explaining what she did, and they had 3 days to get me my ROE, and if it did not arrive with my final paycheck, I would file a complaint with the government and see where it goes. It arrived via Purolator the next day. She was fired 2 months later. The relationship with management in this story was so strained that the narrator even refused a formal farewell cake. The manager's attempt to withhold important exit paperwork only reinforced the narrator's decision to end the professional relationship. Story 35. Was employed at a certain seafood restaurant that was red. Disliked that job more than any in life. The people were awful and management even worse. I dislike corporate restaurants because they jerk-kiss customers so much. Well, this one particular day, I had a Karen in my section. Snooty right from the beginning, we could get nothing right. The bread was too garlicky, too much ice in her tea. The sweet tea was too sweet. Y'all know the type. Well, she sent her pasta back because she didn't understand that it came with red sauce and not Alfredo. On the second trip back to the table, I brought her food back, and this lady sighed, rolled her eyes, and said, "I don't know if you're deaf or just stupid, open," and started ranting about the new dish. Y'all time slowed down, I said to myself. FK. This shoot, I picked up the plate of food and just slowly dumped it in her lap. Untied my apron, dropped it on the floor, and just walked out while she was screaming and my manager was yelling. I was then served with a trespass warning at my apartment later that week and banned from working at any Darden establishment. Story 36. Someone at Chipotle was ready to quit and slapped someone's hand with a spoon when he reached over the glass to point to what he wanted. You don't reach over the glass. Story 37. I was working as a field manager for a company that had a small team. They had recently hired 2 new guys who were fairly green to the industry, but not totally brain dead. One guy, let's call him Gary. He's kind of quiet, kept his head down. I had a distinct feeling that he didn't like me because as his direct supervisor, it was up to me to train him up. Granted, I wasn't the best teacher as I was somewhat blunt and direct, but never insulting or demeaning. It's a slow week and we're cleaning up our warehouse. The 5 of us are all knocking it out so we can get out early, but Gary is kind of slacking off. Since he's not really putting much effort in, I ask, "Hey Gary, can you run the garbage out?" So he loads up the truck and heads out to the dumpsters behind the building. We had a lot of trash, but leaves behind the cardboard. So I think he's making 2 runs to kind of stretch out the workload, right? He comes back and proceeds to not also take the cardboard. "Yo, Gary, can you also do the cardboard?" He gets pissed, storms out to the office, and proceeds to scream about me being a male body part to him, to the bosses. Important note, I did not know this. I figured he was going to hit the bathroom. I walk into the office about 5 minutes later to hear him complaining about how I'm a jerk. The people he's telling this to look at me over his shoulder, and I realize that he's talking mad shoot about me. He realizes it, turns around, and it's a classic "oh fudge." So my one boss, he tells Gary that I am his supervisor, and while he may not like me, he has to at least do as I ask, provided it's within reason. And taking garbage and cardboard out is part of our regular duties, and we all take care of it. Gary gets insanely pissed, starts screaming about how we're all just buddy-buddy and quits. He removes his keys from his belt, we have truck keys, and literally throws them at my boss and storms out cursing. We're all in shock and I'm feeling kind of bashful. Gary comes back in 5 minutes later and asks for the keys because his own car and house keys were still attached. Once he gets them, he says "fudge you" to all of us and storms back out. So epic. To this day, still my favorite of all-time quitting stories. Story 38. Years ago, I worked in construction for a company I didn't like. I was scheduled to go to school a few weeks before I was sent to a job site with a delinquent foreman. He was the son of another foreman, and as soon as they gave him 2 sites to run, he stopped showing up for work, always telling his guys he was at the other site. In the age of cell phones, it was the worst kept secret. I knew I had a few weeks left and no intention of returning after trade school, so I looked through the materials and told him I had a week's worth of parts left and he should get more so we could keep going. He didn't show up, even after a couple of reminders, so I stopped working. The other apprentice was a buddy going to school at the same time, so he stopped as well, and we hung out and shot the chute for the last week. I was so frustrated with the company's complacent attitude, I wrote, "Because we don't care," in 4-inch tall block letters on the lunch table. A sheet of plywood, no real damage done. On the last day, we took every ladder in the faux shack and opened them all up so you couldn't move. Opening the last one by reaching around the inward swinging door so that it tipped down and blocked the door once we had closed it. Locked the shack and laughed all the way to school. Story 39. Relayed to me by one of my buddies. Way back when we were still in high school, my friend's coworker was getting fed up with the supermarket they worked in. It was a few towns over in a not-so-nice area and was right off the highway, so that made it super busy and a lot of out-of-town commuters. He was going away to college and disliked management. On his last day, a woman walks up to his line and tries to browbeat him into taking a bunch of expired coupons. He tells her he needs a check with his supervisor and slowly pulls out a jack-in-the-box from under his till and methodically places it on the scanner and just starts cranking the thing. When it finally pops, he looks her in the eye and just says, "Yeah," he said, "no." She flipped out and screamed for a manager while he just cracks up, takes off his smock, and walks out. Edit. Sent a link to my buddy who wanted to correct a few points. Apparently, we were older than I remember, freshmen in college. The guy who quit was a high school senior. Also, he said it wasn't as smooth as I made it seem. The person who quit had already told his friend coworker, same HS I assume, about his plan, and they were both barely keeping it together. Story 40. I really like my supervisor but dislike my job. He was a real cut-up, so that made it livable. I got a new job and handed him my written 2 weeks notice. Just my luck it was April 1st. He didn't believe me. Every day I'd remind him how many days left. He started getting testy. He'd played a long game himself, but this was too much. Apparently he was quite surprised when I stopped showing up. Answer. Sounds about as close as my last job as it can get. They wanted to move me from what I was trained to do to a compelled different job, for which I had no ability, formation, and I was not willing to do because it was not what I wanted to do at all. I told the shop manager that if he forced me to work on a machine, I'd quit on the spot. He probably thought it was a joke. He gave me small tasks to do on the machines, just some mundane stuff at first. When I realized he was slowly moving me to a permanent position on the machine, I decided to quit the next morning. Got at my deck, a letter on my desk. The boss is asking me to move from the desk job and meet him at the machine that morning. I took my shirt off, changed back to normal outfit, and went to the machine. It wasn't the boss, but my supervisor, which I was quite friendly with, and he knew I would quit if I was moved to a machine. I handed him my shirt and went on my merry way to the front office to get out of there. I met the boss on my way out, and he looked quite surprised that I was leaving. Never heard from them ever again. Submitting a resignation specifically on April Fool's Day led to a unique misunderstanding. Despite daily reminders about the remaining days, the supervisor continued to believe it was a long-running prank and was genuinely surprised when the employee actually left. Story 41. I had a job I really liked, and then my boss left, and we ended up with a new boss who was extremely unpleasant to work for. The stress of it started causing me health issues, and I needed time off for doctor appointments, which made the new boss even worse to deal with. The company I worked for was pretty cool, and I started applying for other positions in the company. I thought I had one locked when I found out new boss went and bad-mouthed me to potential new boss. Potential new boss was fairly new there herself and didn't know me well. Most of the other people who did hiring actually had a good opinion of me, so I shook it off and kept trying. Finally got an offer in a different department I had a good rep with, and who had also had negative experiences with my new boss, who had in fact tried to lose me that job as well. So when I got the offer after actually hugging my new boss, I asked if I needed to type up notice or how the transfer would work. He said because it was internal, he had to negotiate with my current department head on my start date, so he would tell that manager I had accepted the position and work that out. In retrospect, knowing how this boss was, I should have submitted notice when I knew the date, but I didn't. So things went on without my boss saying anything to me about the new job or my end date. And I didn't say anything either because I considered it all worked out. And frankly, I was doing my best to avoid interactions to keep my stress down. Well, one day when I'm like a week or two from leaving, she assigns me to go to the resource scheduling meeting for our department, which means I'm going to schedule certain resources our department needs for the next 3 months. Something the manager really should have taken over when they started, but didn't. I kind of laughed and said, you do realize you're going to have to handle this yourself soon, right? And I don't know anything of the sort. You haven't told me you're leaving. I was kind of shocked and practically shouted, "Oh, well, I'm leaving." And then I was told how unprofessional I was for not giving notice. I tried to apologize and explain that I was told by my new boss it wouldn't be an issue, but I just kept getting yelled at, so I walked away. When I showed up at the resource meeting, everyone was surprised to see me because it made no logical sense to send the person from the department who was leaving, but whatever. I didn't screw her over, mostly because it would have screwed over coworkers I liked, and I didn't want to get a bad reputation for petty revenge, but it was ridiculous. I was so glad to get out from under that manager. My review upon leaving was not good, which followed with an excellent review from my new boss, which had the HR person a little baffled, but sometimes bad managers create bad reviews.